Hello, I'm Kate Williamson and welcome to Keep It Clean, a podcast from Jangro that talks about the changing face of the cleaning industry. Today we're delving into the hidden plight of many workers in the industry, exploring how modern slavery and exploitative labour practices persist within it. What are the red flags to look out for? And how can businesses safeguard these vulnerable workers and protect themselves? It is a taboo topic. How can we make it more of a part of everyday conversation?
I think it's about being proactive in those conversations. So even if you find yourself in that unfortunate position where you identify modern slavery or exploitation within your services, being upfront about it demonstrates that you are an ethical business doing the right thing.
I'm joined by Phil Brewer, Specialist Advisor on Modern Slavery at the Human Trafficking Foundation. Phil was previously a Detective Superintendent in the Met, responsible for investigations into modern slavery and criminal exploitation. Welcome, Phil. And
thanks, Kate.
Thank you for joining us. Literally any organisation is vulnerable to exploitative labour practices. How much of a problem are you aware of is it in the UK cleaning industry?
So it's really difficult to put a figure on it. What I will say is that there is probably exploitative practices in most sort of business sectors across the UK. Not all of them as serious as modern slavery, but with labour breaches, payments below minimum wages, it adds up to quite a number of employees finding themselves in exploitative situations, which may be just in relation to not being paid correctly, working in poor conditions, all the way up to that control and coercive approach where they find themselves either physically or psychologically bonded to their exploiters.
You've said it's prevalent across multiple industries. Why do you think it is so prevalent?
Well, I think in terms of the cleaning industry, I think there are probably some quick wins from an exploiter's point of view.
Okay.
High turnover of staff. I think sometimes it's perceived as a low-skilled role, but as we know, that isn't necessarily the case. But, I think sometimes it's perceived as that.
An easy target almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think some of those things sort of add up to the ability to actually hide away staff as well. If you think from a cleaning point of view, you're unlikely to have your cleaning contractors on site at your busiest times. So if you are looking for a business where you can bring in workers and reduce the risks of getting caught of them striking up conversations or building relationships with workers on site, it's probably ready-made. Your cleaners come in at night or in times when a business is quiet.
Yeah, so not quite as visible.
No, absolutely. And I think they are some of the key challenges in this sector.
Tell me what the common signs are. If you're looking and you're wanting to see a common thread on someone who might be a victim of modern slavery, human trafficking and labour exploitation, what are the common signs? Is there a common thread when you've been looking at people over the years?
So there are. What I will say, it comes with a caveat because some of the indicators that I'll talk about are things that we will probably recognise in colleagues or in scenarios that we've been involved in, which might not necessarily be pointing at someone that's in an exploitative situation. So what I would say is whenever you can, take that step back and look at this objectively. So it might be that you're working with a colleague that comes in quite hungry. They always sort of avoid striking up conversations about their life outside of work. It may be that they are always dropped off early and then picked up late. Just some of those things that almost creates that gut feeling that something isn't right. It's really difficult because I think as individuals, we like those clear red flags, but I think quite often from a modern slavery perspective or from an exploitation perspective, they're not always that clear. So it's really, as I say, taking that step back, looking at the bigger picture and thinking often, my colleague comes in hungry, they often look quite dishevelled, don't always look like they've had enough sleep. They keep themselves to themselves. Whenever I try and talk to them about home life or what they're doing on the weekend, they quickly change the story. That scenario could fit a number of different scenarios. It could be that they just haven't got a very good home life.
Or they just could be a shy person. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's really just looking at that bigger picture and also speaking with people that you trust. You know, if you've seen something or feel that something isn't right, having a chat with a colleague or with your boss or whoever might actually give you that reassurance that something really isn't right. And then there are options that you can take to raise that concern, but without necessarily feeling that you've made a bad call.
You know, if you were working with someone where you had concerns, obviously you would just take that directly to, you know, your company's human resource department, and then they would obviously try and speak to the person individually?
Yeah, I would say that's probably the
or
right
should
move.
you talk to that person yourself, or would you not necessarily do that?
I think it really depends on your relationship, to be honest, Kate. I think in some ways those conversations, if they feel right, then absolutely.
Then do that.
Why not? Because going to HR that are one step removed, that might feel sort of quite an official route to take for HR then to intervene and ask questions. It might actually be that you're well positioned to find out some additional information. Whatever the situation feels, you know, if it feels right, then absolutely. But if it feels that actually you might be overstepping the mark, you could cause offence, then absolutely have that conversation, because it may be talking to HR, talking to your line manager. They may turn around and say, okay, thanks for flagging this. If you can find out anything else, then great. And then I think then that gives you the reassurance that you're not getting involved in something you shouldn't.
Yeah, and I guess also you don't necessarily want to potentially frighten an individual that could already be feeling vulnerable.
Absolutely.
So, you know, okay. Are there any steps that any company can take to protect themselves on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's several things that I think companies can do in terms of any sector. You've got a legitimate business, you're doing the right thing by your workers. So small things, particularly where some of the work is covered by subcontractors or agency workers, then ensuring that they know what they're entitled to from a working perspective in terms of the minimum wage, working conditions. When you're running a legitimate company, you're already doing that, then why wouldn't you share that with staff? Because it may be, that may be the trigger of that conversation to say, that's not happening to me. You know, my agency takes half the money that I earn. That sort of thing could just be the trigger to help them recognise that they are in an exploitative situation.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is over the years, I've come into contact with victims who just don't recognise themselves as such. As far as they're concerned, everything is okay. It could be better than the life they've had before.
Yeah.
And actually that conversation opens it up, and they realise that where they are isn't where they should be in terms of working conditions or the money that they should be earning. And it's just those conversations sometimes that helps an individual recognise the situation that they're in.
I was going to say, because, you know, they may have come from a particular circumstance where they think, you know, I'm working and this is probably what's happening to everyone around me.
Yeah.
But it might not be that case.
No, absolutely. And I think even looking at terms and just setting out, putting some processes in place that you adhere to. So having a clear policy on if someone's got some concerns about another worker, so they know who to report this to. There are other options like the Modern Slavery Helpline, which is completely anonymous service, who will take that information without you being required to give your name and details as well.
Okay, so you can do it completely autonomously.
Absolutely. There's some really good options out there.
Yeah, okay. Can I ask how you got involved in this? Because obviously you were previously with the Met responsible for the topics that we're talking about today. Can I ask how you got involved in it?
It was totally by accident. It's taken over my life. I was a detective inspector on the kidnap unit, the Met's kidnap unit, so dealing with live kidnaps in London. Through some restructuring, one of my bosses decided that human trafficking and kidnap were very similar, which they really are not. And they amalgamated the kidnap unit and the human trafficking unit. I eventually sort of, as I was promoted, took over that unit, oversaw the amalgamation, and became completely fascinated. And I appreciate when we talk about modern slavery and the misery that it brings, but within everyone's story there will be an element of vulnerability that sort of the perpetrators have identified and exploited. So 10 years later, here I am, post-retirement, apparently, working for a human trafficking charity, lecturing about it at university and doing various other pieces of work, including within the cleaning sector, raising awareness around this issue.
Given the amount of years that you've been doing it, have you seen an improvement? Have things got better? Or has it remained the same? Or has it just evolved and changed? How has it changed in the years that you've been working on it, Phil?
So it's definitely changed. If you look back at 2014, when I just found myself here, main focus from a law enforcement point of view was commercial sex exploitation. And if you look at the number of forced labour, servitude type allegations, they were relatively small compared to sexual exploitation. And I think what's happened, it's like with anything in terms of legislation, new legislation is put onto the statute books and our understanding, recognition begins to change within the courts. But also when there's a focus on a particular crime type, those involved, those sort of perpetrators are very adept in terms of changing their approach to avoid detection. And we've absolutely seen that, particularly within forced labour, where I would say 2014, it would be almost like that direct exploitation. So like a gangmaster type scenario of someone bringing in workers to exploit. And then where there's been a focus and convictions on people working in that scenario, we've almost seen like an almost indirect exploitation. So we see workers now working for legitimate companies, being paid minimum wage in adequate working conditions. But the reality is that their accommodation is provided by their exploiters at an extortionate rate. Their travel costs have been put on them almost like a debt bond. Their bank accounts are being controlled by the same people that are providing their accommodation. So the front sort of public facing bit is all legitimate, where the actual exploitation itself is taking place behind closed doors.
And that's much harder for companies to detect. I mean, that's almost, they can't follow up on the home life of every single person under their employment.
I think there's some basic checks that you can put in place, and particularly if you are employing a number of employees. So simple checks like just ensuring that each of those employees has a different bank account. Certainly of the scenario that I've described in one of the cases I dealt with, that wasn't the case. We had several workers who were being paid, their wages were being paid into the same bank account.
Oh, they all had the same bank account.
So, just simple things like that could really make a difference. And absolutely, I think it's very easy to say to businesses, this is on you, there's stuff that you can do. But the reality is it's becoming more and more difficult for businesses to detect this because perpetrators are changing their methods in terms of exploiting others. And like you say, there has to be an expectation of privacy for workers as well. You don't expect your business to almost doing welfare checks on you at home. That can put businesses in quite a difficult position. So this is what I was saying about just raising that awareness, ensuring that employees know their rights, almost preempting that if this is happening to you, then let us know because there's something we can do to help you. Could just be that way out for that individual that will give them the confidence to speak out and seek help.
And that's what you want to do. Effectively, you want to create an environment where people feel that they can have that.
Absolutely.
They can have that conversation.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, it's really about injecting that confidence into someone in helping them to speak out if they find themselves in that situation without any consequences. And I think for me, that's the most important bit. If I talk to professionals on a daily basis around how they can improve their approach to modern slavery and human trafficking. And one of the ways is just keeping that door open. Don't make it at a point of crisis when something seems really bad, because someone in an exploitative situation is unlikely to speak out at that time. But leaving that door open, building that confidence, letting them know that they can trust you could really make all the difference.
When they feel that they need to in that moment, then at least they know that they can.
Absolutely, yeah.
If a company is hiring cleaning services, can they look at that particular company and see if they've got specific certifications, specific accreditations, so that they have some degree of peace of mind that the people that are working for that cleaning services company are not being exploited in any way?
I don't think there's any accreditation as such, but the positives of the internet do allow you to search things such as for those bigger cleaning contractors, looking at whether they voluntarily put in place a modern slavery statement. I would suggest probably most companies don't have a turnover of £36 million or more. But some companies who approach this morally and ethically in a positive way have voluntarily put in place modern slavery statements. So I think that is a good indicator that they've taken that
They've taken a step towards it.
Yeah, but I also think as a client employing cleaning services, there are also opportunities when you are writing up that contract, thinking about how you can put in place safeguards for yourself as well. So, putting in place about the checking of visas or documents. I don't see that being wrong or awkward to include that informing that agency that you may perform regular checks. Even at a person level, just having that conversation with the cleaners that are working within your premises, just getting a feel for them and just making them feel part of the team. Is a good way of building that trust and confidence that actually if there is something untoward, they're far more likely to disclose that than if you just treat them as someone in the background that turns up and makes everything clean and tidy and smell nice.
What responsibilities do the clients of cleaning contractors in large shopping centres, hospitality businesses, what responsibilities do they have in preventing modern slavery?
Well, as I mentioned, under the Modern Slavery Act, those companies that have a turnover of more than 36 million have a mandatory responsibility for producing and publishing a modern slavery statement. So that should set out, if it's a good statement, and not all statements are good, but if it's a good statement, it will set out what they've put in place in terms of protection of workers, raising awareness, etc. I think morally and from an organisational reputation point of view, I think there's a massive responsibility to ensure that you put processes or actions in place that demonstrate that you are approaching this in the right way, that you are considering potential exploitation within your supply chain or within your day-to-day work. So, there may not necessarily, you may not fall into that category of having to provide a modern slavery statement, but the reality is that if you are running a business and that exploitation is found within that supply chain or within your service, then it can put you in quite a difficult position, particularly if it becomes of interest to the media, and that can really damage your business. So, whatever direction you come at this from, I think there's a real incentive to just protect yourself by putting in place those processes. So if you find it, you know exactly what to do, what the next steps are in terms of demonstrating that you care about the people that are working on your premises or within your business.
It is a taboo topic. How can we make it part or make it more of a part of everyday conversation?
I think that's relatively easy. I think it's about being proactive in those conversations and in terms of what you do, particularly from a business perspective. No one wants modern slavery and human trafficking to impact on their reputation. But I think being proactive, so even if you find yourself in that unfortunate position where you identify modern slavery or exploitation within your services, being upfront about it is just a way that actually sort of almost brings it to the forefront. It demonstrates that you are an ethical business doing the right thing. So, it's a difficult subject for so many different reasons, from making the wrong call, and that can feel quite awkward. But I think actually making it part of that conversation, highlighting, what workers should expect from you in terms of pay and conditions, what they should expect from the agencies that might be employing them or from subcontractors, is just a way of sort of almost normalising that conversation around this. Modern slavery exists. It's not going to go away by not talking about it. And I think demonstrating that you are open, that you understand, can make a real difference.
Yeah, communication should be one of the easiest things to do, but
definitely
often
not always.
Often one of the hardest. So if we had someone listening to this podcast who thought someone was at risk, or they were at risk, and I know you've talked about people being able to come forward, is there actually somewhere they can go and report it? I mean, that they might not feel comfortable going directly to the police. Some people don't. What organisations are there that they can go and report it?
So the main organisation I would recommend is Unseen, are a UK-based charity. They run the National Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline, so 08000 121 700. It's a service where not only where you can report your suspicions, but they also provide support and advice for a range of people, so businesses, even the police. If police are unsure about how to deal with a certain case of modern slavery, they can provide. It's quite a well-rounded, a well-rounded service. I would say it's a really good starting point. They've also got a website. If you're not quite sure where to go, then have a look at their website, and you can find that just by searching Modern Slavery Helpline. But there's also other charities. Hope for Justice provide a free 30-minute course around modern slavery and human trafficking. So there's some options where you can both educate yourself, feel more confident about where to go or what processes to put in place for your company. But I would say sort of, if there's a real worry about contacting police, or if you're not quite sure that you're at a place where you should be and you don't want to waste their time, then I would say Unseen would be a great start.
And given that you have been working in this field for such a long time, are you more optimistic now than you were when you started? Is that difficult because it's constantly evolving?
Yeah, no, I think the issue with modern slavery, with most forms of modern slavery, is that they are built on legitimate business models. So your traditional business model, you will see within most cases of modern slavery and human trafficking, the difference is that it's individuals are exploited to either maximise profit or to reduce costs.
Yeah.
That's the main framework of what we're dealing with. Many, I think, aspirationally, absolutely, let's stamp out modern slavery. I think in reality, what we can do is just continue to frustrate the perpetrators. That can be done in another way, raising awareness, ensuring that businesses are informed so they can make some choices around what they want to put in place. But also from a public point of view, it's really keeping on pushing that message. But, let's stay optimistic, Kate.
I have no problem with that. Listen, thanks, Phil, for joining me today, sharing your insights and your knowledge on this subject. It's been really interesting. And thank you for listening. The contact details Phil mentioned on where to report any concerns will be listed in the episode description. Find more information about the future of cleaning and the challenges ahead on the podcast page of our website, jangro.net. Here you can also find more about Jangro. Keep the conversation going, and remember, stay vigilant, stay compassionate. We can always make a difference together. See you next time.